Next, we have an esteemed guest who has long paved the way for emergency and trauma care in Malaysia. She is the Senior Consultant, Emergency Physician, and Co-Chair of PATOS Executive Committee, Professor of Emergency Medicine, Universiti Teknologi Mara, UiTM. And she will be talking about the role of MTR in trauma research and development in Malaysia. We welcome Professor Dr. Sabariah Faizah Jamaluddin to the stage.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for this MTR collaborating conference, for inviting me, and because trauma and the registry has always been a passion for me, and I'm really appreciate that you have invited me. If you have invited me as a delegate, I will still come as a delegate, you know, instead of speaking in front of you all, because and the advantage of being the speaker on third day, because what you have heard the previous days, right, is also in my lecture, so I don't have to speak a lot of it, right? So just maybe share some of my experiences of how we do research from your registry data. Okay, so again, research is pretty boring. You can go to sleep if you want to, but as my school teacher always tell me, if you want to go to sleep, don't disturb others. Okay, so just a bit of my objectives that I would like to cover is we've talking about trauma registry all the while, but you know, how do you define that? A bit of the trauma registry history in Malaysia. How does trauma registry helps in trauma care? And for the past few days that if you listen to it, so this is something that I need to cover. You all are here because you know that the registry will definitely help in the trauma care of the patients in Malaysia. And some of the research utilization, if you have the data, how do you go about doing research? And if you've heard about Dr. Norizan talking about how you go about with where you get the data, and you had the workshop yesterday about how to write up the protocols and the statistical analysis about them, and then about the implementation of the research from MTR. Okay, so when we can I hold this? Okay. No, tak boleh tarik lah. Okay, when we define trauma registry, right? They usually follow these two researchers, Noame and Moore, when they talk about trauma registries. So one of the definitions is a timely, accurate, comprehensive data source that allows for continuous monitoring of the process of the injury care. As you see from Dr. Yo's presentation, you can get the data source, you have the data source, and then you do have, right, from the dashboard, continuous monitoring of this patient throughout the whole process of injury, from the time of injury to the time the patient leaves the hospital, right? And databases is document the acute care that you deliver to patients as hospitalized with injuries, and design and provides the information that can be used to improve efficiency and quality of care. So it's not only just to get the data, but from the data, what we plan to do is to improve the efficiency of the care that you give to the patient and the quality of trauma care. Sorry, my slides are not is not moving. All right. So let's just go to the development of trauma registry, a bit of history quickly. So when we look at the annual reports, every time you look at the MOH annual reports, you're going to see that trauma will be about, injuries will be about between the 3rd to the 5th cause of injuries and cause of admission to hospitals and death. So there was a injury preventive consultative report in 2001. Not quite sure who came out with the report. So from the report, what we plan to do was set up an injury surveillance, a national injury surveillance unit. But we thought that injury surveillance unit is a bit more difficult because you're talking about looking at all the injuries that the patient had, from the green to the red and to the death. Right. So it's a too big something that we can handle. So in 2005, we proposed the National Trauma Database that just looks into the severe injuries patients like in the red zone as you are doing now. And in 2006 and 2005, the MOH gave us a major research grant to do the study. Okay, so we first collect the data in 2006, and the last data was collected in 2009. So in 2009, we had the we were fortunate to have collaboration with MIROS. So MIROS gave us the research assistant to be in about 5 of the Klang Valley EDs. So these research assistants were the one who collect the data and do the coding. So the 2009 data is a pretty good data. Okay, so with that collaboration with MIROS. And for your definition of the cases that to be in the database, right? Basically, we take all patients that is in the red zone. Then through the system, when they go into the web, as you enter data, we'll only pick certain patients. I assess among 15 patients are intubated and patients who died from injury. Same thing as you all have this. So initially, all patients that goes to the red zone, and we came up about four reports. So the data from what we got from the initial trauma database, the initial trauma registries came out as reports, right? As 4 reports they come out. So if they want to look at all trauma reports in Malaysia, you can. But again, it is not a population base. Only few hospitals were involved in collecting the data for this. And then we had, and from that we came up about 4 or 5 papers looking at trauma in the cases, and especially what we like is the one that is published in the Malaysian Medical Journal, because that looks in the data, and that's what mostly collected. And we collaborated with Monash universities and some of the master students from USM to come out with some research papers that comes out for that, and looking at the geriatrics patients and looking at the pediatric group of patients that we have. And again, with MIROS, the MIROS came out and wrote this paper about pattern of atypical injuries. So you can, right, even from those limited data, come up with something that, especially from the reports, right, that those people who want to look at trauma in Malaysia, especially our KKM, our leaders, can look into it, right? So when you talk about registries and trauma care, what do you look for? What can you study, right? And what is the use of this registry? You can look at outcomes. You look at quality control queries. Quality control, very, very important. Lee Wallace talked about it yesterday. Michael Dunphy talked about it again yesterday. Identifying injury trends, right? In UK, Korea, probably also in Australia, the average age of trauma patients is about 50 to 60. What in Malaysia and in Southeast Asia is still in the young. The less than 35 patients are mostly involved in trauma. So the injury trends differ. So maybe as we go as an elderly population, we can look at our injury trends, and maybe with more strict regulation of the laws, for example, the rear seat belt, probably we can look at these injury trends, whether the rear seat passengers are getting more injured or not, right? You can look at your timeliness of procedures, managements, appropriateness. Of course, the registry is used to facilitate trauma care, and also to integrate financial data and resource utilization. If that area has a lot of trauma, will you not want to put your resource around that area? But how do you get that data? So that data is through the trauma registry, right? If the KKM says, okay, we will want to put 1 trauma physician here, 1 surgeon here, or surgeon here, and all the, because it is a place where major traumas occur. So this is how they look to decide. So with the trauma registry data, you can help to decide how the resources go to, and that be spoken about by the previous speaker. So when you look at quality and research initiatives, you can assess the outcome, look at injury prevention, document medical, and I've mentioned that again. All right. So when you look at quality involvement, you can go through the whole spectrum, right, to look into the quality and go through the usual quality circle when you look at the injury, pre-hospital care, hospital care, rehab, recovery. So don't just do one off and then don't do the remedial measures, right? That is the value of quality improvement programs. So I won't talk about you, all are experts in it because it's the major part of a KKM hospital. And then these are some guidelines for you if you want to do trauma improvement programs for trauma. And from the WHO books, guidelines trauma quality programs is a good is a good guide for you. Okay, right. So when you want to do the trauma, you want to do your trauma improvement programs, right? You look at the variables that is in your database. What are the variables that is captured in the trauma data, captured in your trauma registry? So from those, then you start looking at certain things, right? Okay. Slow lah. Move next slide, please. Where's my slide? Can move next slide, please? Okay. So looking at the variables that you have, if you want to do a quality training, right, as part of your quality research, right? One slide behind. There's another one. Yeah, okay. If you want to look at outcomes, these are the things that you can look at. Many things. And it is part of the variables in your MTR that you can study. Okay? Want to do quality things. Again, for quality, you do your Ishikawa drawing, your fish bones, and discuss what you think that you want to do for your hospital. And look at this. Length of stay, ICU admissions. When you look at clinical management, traumatic activation, fluid, blood, you saw the dashboard yesterday, how many patients, just now, how many patients got their operations in, get your operations inside, and what are the injuries sustained. You want to look at just pelvic fractures, as just study pelvic fractures, right? And you can get that from the database as part of your audits, as part of your quality, and as part of your research. For example, are we managing severe pelvic fractures well, right, in your hospital or in the country? You just can look at that. So all these things are available for you from your database. Next slide, please. Okay. And this is very important, right? This is where the data is used, right, for the KKM and for the country. When you look at the epidemiology, when you look at some of the substance abuse that we have, and some of the use of your safety devices in the car or on the roads. And now some databases are looking into the mobility devices. You know, the scooter yang lari tepi jalan tu, right? Yang pusing tu, yang tak tahu. I saw one wheel, you tahu. This guy on the highway on just that one wheeler, jalan-jalan. I wonder how he maintains his balance and crazy, you know, right? And one person on that scooter, I was in somewhere else, and then we were this group of us doctors. We were just having a holiday somewhere, and he happened to have an accident right in front. He fell down right in front of us. He's fortunate because there's a group of doctors, group of anesthetists, and we just to look at that. All right. And of course, from that, if we call the health economics in, we can look at all the costs that is happening in the country, right? So a lot of this role from the data, you could utilize it in many ways. Right? But before you can do that, right, you have to get the data out there. Peter Cameron says, if you can remember out there, for the registry to make a change, the data has to be there, right? And the data has to be out there, not inside the computer, not inside a hospital. Has to be published, has to be reports have to be made and to be given to the powers that be to have a look, right? Then you can say that your trauma registry do make a differences. We are still in our infancy stage. We probably started 21, then COVID and all those things. So our data is still limited. But once we have the data, right, and Dr. Shah and his team and the governance of the MTR, right, are in the right track, getting the data later on, all right, to the people that's responsible for trauma care in our country. Okay, so data saves lives, all right? This is what Lee Wallace says, data saves lives. So that's something very important for you. So I just want to show you how this data saves life. If you get actual data, you study the data and see how it occurs, right? This is the UK and part of Europe Trauma Audit and Research Network from the TAN, right? Next, okay. So what the TAN did was before 20, so they had already a registry in the UK, right? And so before 2010, from the registry data, trauma patients are brought to nearest hospital. I mean, that's what's happening in most parts of Malaysia anyway, right? And they generated many reports. So when they got this data and they look at the outcome was not very favorable, they generated many reports to the government, to the Royal College, to their colleges, to the audit commissions, to the National Audit Office, right? Probably to the Ministry of Health. They don't have ministry, they have Secretary of Health and all those things. So once they got this data, they got it out there. They put it out there, spread it out, let the people know. Next, please. And then with that, they are able now to reorganize the trauma system in the country. Original data from the registry. So then once they have reorganized the trauma system in the UK in 2012, they again use the trauma registry to evaluate the change. Next. Right. If you can look at this, if you can look at this, this is the odds ratio of survival, right? So before 2012, it was on the below, right? Below 1, so which means that less chances of it to survive. But once after 2012, after 2012, right, you see all of it above the 1 line, which means that more and more patients are survive from the trauma. And how did they do this? How did they show this? Right, through the registry data. And how they do this? They have to do research on this data for them to be able to show this and to get this to prove that the trauma systems that they developed is effective, right? For example, it was shown also just now. This shows you very interesting. Hospital. I'm not quite sure whether this is in Malaysia. Hospitals with trauma physicians have less mortality than hospitals without trauma physicians. Sorry, I'm not saying that the other emergency physicians are just not doing a good job. But we can have more detailed look into it just as an example, whether that works. If that is the case, right, then probably this is where the Ministry of Health have to increase the intake of fellows from the trauma physicians and spread it out to the rest of the country. Next, please. Okay. Now, this is my experience of doing research for trauma registry with the Pan-Asian Trauma Outcome Study in Malaysia. Most of you here, your hospitals were involved in the PATOS. Which hospitals involved in PATOS? Angkat tangan tak? No broken hand syndrome, eh? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Banyak lah kan? There's about 15 sites in Malaysia to be the Pan-Asian trauma. So this is Asia, yeah. So you got the registry, which is Asia, and we send the data, and the coordinate center is in Seoul, Tokyo, right? So what they did was, okay, so they've got data. We've got Malaysian data, we've got Asian data. So they do not let the data sit in the computer, right? So what they did was every year they have a research workshop, and some of the people over here has gone
Okay, you can reserve your questions at the end because now we're back up and running.
Next slide, please. Okay, so when we go there, they update us, right? They call all the countries country representative, and then they update us what are the present data. So as of now, PATOS is about 170,000 data in their database. Next, please. Okay, so this is an example. You can't read it, never mind. This is an example of what they're talking about. For example, for last year, they had looking at trauma database utilization in Japan, Malaysia, Singapore. So this is idea where we get and exchange ideas, right? And this is how research gets spreads, right? So of course, MTR doing such collaborating conference like this is one of a very good example of how MTR were able to promote research. Okay, next, please. Okay. MTR has tons of data inside it, and you want to do research. You have an idea, you've gone to the course yesterday, workshop yesterday, you've heard Dr. Norizan has that, and some of you already have known your basic research, especially the emergency physicians. Now, how do you go about that? Somebody has to look into all this data, because at the end of it, maybe Dr. A want to do research, Dr. B want to do research, it's the same topic, and then they don't communicate with each other. So how do MTR, how do the coordinating center, right, is able to make sure that the research you're doing is of quality, and the research that you are doing do not duplicate each other, and the research that you're doing will contribute, right, to the data for the country's use, right? So what the PATOS does is they have this study proposal, a very simple form. You write your study proposal, you send it to them, right? They will evaluate it. 5 people will evaluate. I'm one of the evaluators, and we say if it's approved. Once approved, you do the study. You want some statistical help, you ask from the Koreans, but very difficult to get them to help us with the statistic. I did try once, never got a reply back. Okay, so maybe what we can do is MTR, right? If you want to do research, you send your study proposal to MTR. MTR will evaluate it and say, okay, yes, you can do. Of course, you register your studies with the MREC. Next. So these are some of the. Can you just scroll it? Next. So these are some of the studies that have been given. And these are some from the proposals and some of the publications from the from what we get, right? You can't read it, it's okay, but there's a multiple publications, something that you want to look at. For example, okay, pre-hospitalization and functional outcome of patient. Does it matter or not? Right? If I do pre-hospitalization, I don't do pre-hospitalization, does it matter? Now, will that not be a way for you to improve your trauma care? But you got to do the research. You got to look into it. Either you do a full research or you did an audit on that. Next, please. Next, please. And this is just came out 2023, just last week. All right. So look at this lah. Short index, reverse index, that's all mortality. So they've told what are the most important criteria when you're looking into the mortality of this patient. Next, please. Okay, next. Children, all right? Okay. The purpose of getting the data is to have, when you have the data, right, is for people to write up it, to do the audits and write up the research. How many of you here betul-betul lah dengan seikhlas jangan malu ya, that you're going to sit down and do some research on this? Nobody? Nobody want to do research. Then how? The data will just sit inside the computer if you're not doing research. Dr. Shah and his team, the coordinating center, can't be doing everything. It's to you. So your work and seems to be like data collectors lah, but very, very, very important. Data collectors is very important. So once you collect data, then we offer people who are interested to do the research on the MTR data, right, to do the studies, to do the research, right? This is the list of USM students doing their master dissertation from the PATOS data. Some using Malaysian data only, some using the whole Asian data. So we should open the MTR data to anybody, any institution that would like to do research from the MTR data. Of course, they have to go through the proper way, write up the proposal, reviewed by the governments or the research part of the unit of the MTR to say that you are able to look. And of course, then you share a declaration form that your data that we give to you, you will not share with anybody else, which means that, you know, we'll give you the database, right? And that cannot be given to anybody else. We don't want any leaks, and they want other people to take our data for free. Of course, this data is free, right? So it can be done. And I see very much more of this happening in Malaysia, because we have got this whole group of enthusiastic people. We've got, some of you are going to be master students later on. You might want to write something that you have done in your hospital as part of your master dissertation, right? Next, please. Okay. And this is, I found very good. This is the Iranian, from the Iranian database. Okay, they all sat together and came out from the registry. What are the most important research that I can do from the registry for the country, for the betterment of the country and trauma care? And this is what they come up with, right? Cause of death, incidents, degree of injury, trauma death, incidents in children. So, as a group, all right, you all can sit down and look, what do you want to study? What the important things you want to study, right? So that this data goes out and have some improvements, or have improvements for the country. Next. And collaboration. We are now living in a borderless world. Because the NTRD, the Initial Trauma Database, the funding was cut. So when the PATOS came around, it was a trauma registry. We jumped on the PATOS bandwagon. So when the MTR comes in, we stop the PATOS data collection. But what we plan to do is, again, sharing and collaborating with each other, right? So there are plans, or further discussions that so that MTR will share data with PATOS and even WHO. You saw Lee Wallace lectures yesterday. The WHO have their own trauma database, or have their own registry, which probably we can share data with them. So we're sharing data, collaborating with other people, looking how other people do with further research and getting the information out there, and getting the improvements that we want that the registry can give to the country. Again, this is a very tall order by the MTR. Getting research, next please, getting what is required to do, because registry is not a sprint. It's not Usain Bolt, right? The PATOS has been on for nearly 10 years. The renal registry has been on for nearly 20 years. Registries are long-term, marathon, go on and on and on and on. Maybe some of you SMO, you jadi pakar, right? Surgeons or emergency physicians, right? You will have the registry still goes on, because trend change. You need to know the trends, right? Things change, right? And then these are betterment of the country. So this is a long haul. So be prepared for a long haul. Not today, we do, two years later, we got the data, kita tutup kedai, no. Right? This is a long haul. So be prepared for a marathon. Right? Next, please. Right? And that's my last slide. Okay. And thank you very much for having me, for having me here to talk on your conference. And if I'm open for questions. Thank you.